short term anyway.
Huh? No, I was sick. It's okay. This isn't where I sit during service either. I just can't be close. I was just seeing
I got me a fresh pocket of spitwads. I'm gonna throw them at the teacher.
Well, I'm going to have to write you up for that, Roy. Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Looks like I ran some people off. We're much smaller this morning. It's cold. So my understanding is this is the last Sunday morning class for this year. At least that's my understanding. So no class the next 2 weeks. What's today? 14th. So yeah, 21st, 28th, and then we'll resume this on the in January in the new year. So now, if that's not the case, I don't know. I hope that's right. I've been misinformed if so. All right, we are continuing with our theme here, right now. Now, let's see who was paying attention. Give me the date. No, I won't ask you for dates. But tell me what 3 books we're taking our lessons from.
Nehemiah.
There you go, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Now, do you remember how they kind of fit together? Ezra and Nehemiah were one book at one time. But the storyline and chronology, and again, if you look at the Bible, there's really not a perfect way to put them in order because they're all over the place, but understanding chronology kind of helps. Definitely helps with the big picture. Because, chronologically, like Isaiah should be before Ezra. It's got prophecies that come to pass at that time. But anyway, I'll review over that here in a second. But yeah, that's where we are, and today we're going to focus on Zerubbabel's story. But coming back to this, God works to accomplish His purposes. So God's chosen nation of Israel was a privileged group who squandered extraordinary blessings. So this was a group that was selected by God to bring this higher sense of morality, and of course ultimately bring the gospel to us. And it's important, anytime you're reading the Bible, especially the Old Testament, you need to understand, you need to ask yourself, and this is something I didn't really get until more recent studies, where is the gospel in this story? Where is the coming of Christ in the story? Because it's there if you understand where to look. But Israel had proved unfaithful to her calling. Last week we read from Isaiah 29:13, which basically talks about Israel had a heart problem. They weren't seeking Him. They were going through the motions, and something's going to have to be done. They got chance after chance after chance, and it just wasn't working out. So God's people had rejected Him as the one true God for worship and devotion. Instead, they turned to the idols of the surrounding nations, involving themselves in detestable practices and abusing one another by withholding justice and mercy in the land. They weren't following the laws that God prescribed them, and they certainly weren't keeping the first commandments, right? They weren't honoring God. They weren't putting Him above everything else. They were trying to be too much like the world, and this certainly is something that we struggle with today. It's not always easy to separate ourselves from this world. Finally, God finally had enough with their evil ways. Israel was destroyed by Assyria to the north. Judah was carried away into exile in 3 groups by Babylon far to the east. And this is about 605, 586 BC. And again, if you look at Isaiah was written around 800 BC, 750 BC. So long before all this transpired. Those prophecies coming true is remarkable in itself. And it just proves God's hand on things, God's overall control over the history of the world. And again, understanding how some of this stuff fits. I'm going to look at a passage in Psalms here in a second, but the book of Lamentations, right? It's a book full of lamenting, right? What is the lamenting about?
Oh, poor me. They were lamenting because they wasn't getting their way and what God had turned loose on them.
Now, historical context-wise, and I know you may not be that familiar with the historical context, but you got all these chapters of people lamenting, and like squeezed in the middle of Lamentations is like this hope. And there's hope, but we're pretty upset about these things. But the lamenting is actually by the people who were left in Judah. When the Babylonians came in and the Assyrians came in the north and the Babylonians and carried away all those Jewish people, all the Israelites and tribes of Judah, they left some people. Well, the people left. That's what Lamentations about. It's about their complaints, their concerns, their sorrows. That's where Lamentations fits in. Now, you look at Psalms 137. This is a lament from the people who got taken off to Babylon. So, I'll just read through this. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." Obviously, there's a lot of sarcasm in here, a lot of mean facetiousness. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundations. Daughter Babylon, doomed to construction. Happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. Happy is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. All right, this is obviously some pretty strong language, quite a few emotions being cast out here, being expressed. But this is a lament from the people who got shipped off. Now, last week we talked about the good that's going to come out of this, part of God's plan for the best things to turn out the way it's supposed to. And if you remember, at the end of class, showed you that video by Frank Turek talking about how God makes us the people He wants us to be by going through tough times. And that's essentially what you got going on here with the Israelites, with those shipped off to Babylon. And He's going to get what He needs from the people, from the Jews, ultimately as part of His big plan. Looked at this last week. What was accomplished during God's people's 70 years of exile. They knew they were going away for 70 years. It was prophesied to them, and it came to pass. But the exile experience gave birth to Orthodox Judaism. They gave themselves to a strict adherence of the law of God. And that's important. And again, I've We talked about this last week. When you get into the New Testament world, you see that idols worship is not their biggest issue. That problem is gone. You're going to see different kinds of issues, more dealing with legalism. But the synagogue was established, creating local palaces of worship to fill the void created when the temples were destroyed. When you look at the New Testament, where do most of those apostles do their teaching? Where does Paul go every week? Where are they spreading the gospel? Well, they're speaking mostly from the synagogues, right? There were no synagogues before this exile because they had so much focus on the temple in Jerusalem and the such. The scribe became a part of Jewish life, a professional teacher, student of the law of Moses. When we get back to this in January, we'll look at the story of Ezra, who was a very good scribe, a very good priest. And finally, the diaspora occurred. If you're not familiar with that, that's the scattering of the Jews among the nations. They were no longer exclusively in the land of promise, so they spread out. And again, that's all important in understanding the big picture, the big plan of Jesus coming and that message of the gospel spreading. So there you go. All right, a little review again of the structure of this. Ezra 1 through 6, that's where we're going to be today, if you want to open your books. But Cyrus allows Zerubbabel to return to Jerusalem and construct a new temple around 539 BC. Again, just like it's prophesied, Isaiah actually gives you the name of Cyrus 150 years before it happens. And then when we come back in January, we'll look at Esther. The story of Esther takes place between the chapters of Ezra 6 and 7. There's a 58-year gap there where that story happens. In fact, when you're reading the story of Ezra chapters 1 through 6, Ezra hasn't even been born yet. He's a relatively young guy, and actually the story of Esther happens before Ezra's even born. But we'll get to chapter 7 through 10, and then Nehemiah. Again, story-wise, Ezra's rebuilding the temple. Zerubbabel is rebuilding the temple. Ezra is going to bring the word, the morality of Nehemiah. Nehemiah will build the wall in Jerusalem. All right, so before we get into Ezra, I want to look at Daniel 5. So if you want to flip over there, you can. In fact, if somebody will do that, I'll let you read these verses. Verses 23 through the end of the chapter. There's some fun words in there, some fun names in there you can have some joy out of trying to pronounce. But this is a story, when I was a kid, I was always mesmerized by this story. Just the writing on the wall by this mysterious hand. I always wanted to envision myself being there and seeing this. This would have been amazing to see. Would have scared the bejeez out of you, but it's a cool story. So, anybody there yet? Got it? Sure. Do whatever you want.
For you proudly defied the Lord of heaven and have had these cups from his temple brought before you. You and your nobles and your wives and concubines have been drinking wine from them while praising gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Gods that neither see nor hear nor know anything at all. But you have not honored the God who gives you the breath of life and controls your destiny. So God has sent his hand to write this message. This is the message that was
and that brings in the Persian Mede Empire. Now, I should have started with this. This is Daniel interpreting the dream and the hand and the message. This is Daniel interpreting this for Belteshazzar, who was Nebuchadnezzar's son, who brought the Jews over to Babylon. So, and I love that quote. That quote is in some movie. I can't remember what it. You have been weighed and found wanting, right? So God is speaking to him, and we know this was part of God's plan, right? You're going to go into captivity, but God is going to punish these people. He's doing what he wants them to do, but he's still going to serve justice. And he's telling Belteshazzar, hey, here he comes, buddy. This was prophesied. It's going to happen, and you're about to lose your throne. So that takes us into the Jews being allowed to go back to their homeland. So going back to Ezra, or going into Ezra, again, the first 6 chapters are all about this story. First of all, about them leaving, and about, of course, Zerubbabel and rebuilding the temple. So Ezra chapter 1, starting in verse 1. Anybody want to volunteer for that one? Ezra chapter 1, verse 1 through 5.
In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make proclamation throughout his realm and also put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord God of heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has appointed me to build a temple for him in Jerusalem, in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord God of Israel, the God who is Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with free will offering from the temple of God in Jerusalem. Then the family heads of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose heart God had moved, prepared to go up and build the house of the Lord in Jerusalem.
All right, so the plan is initiated. Right here, Cyrus, who was named well before all this transpired, he is going to allow them to go. He's going to give them his blessing, so to speak, just as God had prophesied. And he's even going to provide them with a lot of the supplies they need. Back in Daniel that we just read, the king, the Babylonian king, Belteshazzar, he was using the stuff that they had stolen from the Jewish temple in this big feast, this big party they were having. And all that stuff is going to go back to the Jews and let them take that back to their homeland.
We in this history we have throughout, we leave God out of so many of these instances right here. God's the one that moved Cyrus's heart to do this, but we take him out of it. It was his choice to do all this. No, it was not. He done what God wanted him to do.
Right. And the thing is, people get into these debates over, well, what about free will? And God doesn't override anybody's free will. Here's the thing about Cyrus, and that's kind of the point of this slide right here. Like you said, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, right? Cyrus was a special person in the plan of God. Cyrus became impressed with the God of Israel. Now, some scholars think, well, maybe he was impressed with the God of Israel because he saw his name in the book of Isaiah. I don't know. That's certainly possible, but there's some other things too that you can see God using the circumstances to work his plan. Okay, there's something called the Cyrus cylinder. They found this, archaeologists found this, and on this little stone cylinder, there's an inscription. It says, "May all the gods whom I have resettled in their sacred cities. Ask daily Bel and Nebo for a long life for me. So those two names right there, those are Babylonian, Persian Mede gods right there. But notice his wording there. May all the gods whom I have resettled in their sacred cities. So he's got like this respect. Basically, he wants to cover all his bases, right? He wants to say, hey, I'm going to try to keep everybody, all these gods happy. He's like superstitious, and but that makes him open to working God's plan. Cyrus was pluralistic in his thinking and would fit in well with views about religion that are held by many today. There's a lot of people out there, that they won't accept the gospel because they got this idea that everybody is right. Everybody has their own truth, right? There's not one absolute truth. There's whatever is true to you, right? This relative truth stuff. And it's a dangerous thing in our society because a lot of people buy into that. And we know that there is an absolute truth, and there's all kinds of proof out there. There's all kinds of evidence for it. We have a rational God, and there's rational things that if you study the evidence, you can conclude that God's plan, God's truth, the truth that we know of, that we know it as, is the absolute truth. But he's using Cyrus to get the Israelites, the Jews, to where he needs them to be after the 70-year exile. So God carries out a 150-year plan, one conceived long before the exile of Judah took place. God works in the history of man to accomplish his kingdom purposes. And again, see the big picture. And it's so easy for us now to see it because we're living in 2025. But those guys were living it out. And just like us, when we're living our lives, we don't necessarily see the big picture. And that's when we tend to get ourselves in trouble, when we don't trust and don't understand God's in control. All right, that takes us to Ezra chapter 2. Now, not many verses here for Ezra chapter 2, because most of Ezra chapter 2 is a lot of names and numbers. Now, we've seen this before, but that stuff is important. That stuff is important to the Jews for different reasons, but starting verse 1 there, it says, Now there are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had taken captive to Babylon. They returned to Jerusalem and Judah, each to their own town. So they've made that 900-mile journey, and they've come back to their homeland, and they've gone back to their old towns. In company with Zerubbabel, Joshua, Nehemiah, Mordecai, Mishon. Yeah, those guys right there listed in verse 2. And it goes on to list a lot more, and it goes on to give you the number. And what it comes out to, there's basically 50,000 people that have left Babylon, and they've gone back to their traditional homeland. Now, of course, I got Zerubbabel highlighted there. Again, if you want to see where things fit in, grand scheme of things, here's Matthew chapter 1. And who do we see in the genealogy of Jesus? It's in boldface if you want to don't see it. And it even prefaces it right there, right? Verse 12 of chapter 1. After the exile to Babylon, Jeremiah was the father of Zerubbabel. And you just follow the line down there. It goes all the way to who in verse 15? Verse 16, sorry. Verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. So, how many of y'all remember the genealogy stuff, the numbers wise, right? I just told you, never mind. 14 generations before Babylon and 14 after, right? It's almost like God had all this planned. Now, there's some different things about this genealogy that people have disagreements with, stuff that seems like conflicts or contradictions, depending on what gospel you're looking at. But there's also good explanations for them, good retorts for some of those comments. But like, one's about showing the lineage of Joseph, one's showing the lineage of Mary. But there it is. There's your connection with Zerubbabel. Very concrete, obvious evidence there to the Gospels, and a good timing there because we're about to celebrate Christmas, right? But that's Ezra 2. There's 70 verses in Ezra 2. Now, if you like fun names to pronounce and lots of numbers, you can continue reading Ezra 2. But I'm going to go ahead and go to Ezra 3. All right, so Ezra 3, Zerubbabel and the construction of the new temple. So, good story here. Going to read a few passages here and there. So, first of all, what does Zerubbabel mean? His name means planted in Babylon. Okay, so he represents a generation born in Babylonian captivity. So he was born in Babylon. He never actually knew the hometown. He never knew the homeland. He never knew Zion, right? So where does his zeal come from? Because this guy is clearly on board with going back and getting this established, getting the old temple built. Oh, sorry. So Ezra, chapter 3, verse 1 through 6. When the 7th month came and the Israelites had settled in their towns, the people assembled together as one in Jerusalem. Then Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and his fellow priest, and Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and his associates began to build the altar of the God of Israel, to sacrifice burnt offerings on it in accordance with what is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So, it also says in the next verse, despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. This in accordance with what is written. They celebrated the festival of tabernacles with the required number of burnt offerings prescribed for each day. After that, they presented the regular burnt offerings, the new moon sacrifices, and the sacrifices for all the appointed sacred festivals of the Lord, as well as those brought as freewill offerings to the Lord. I'll just kind of stop there. So these are the first two things. I'll just bring it up in a second. This is the first thing. They're going to build an altar, and they're going to offer sacrifices to God, and they're going to honor and observe their festivals, the old Jewish festivals. So what does this tell you about how they're going about their business?
Try to put God back first, I think.
Is that a good first step? Good first step. So, I know they have this sense of of being part of God's plan. They have to. There's just been too many things that have happened that have gone. It's been very fortuitous for them, and there's lots of zeal. But that verse talking about how even though they were fearful of the people around them, they're gonna do it anyway. They're gonna be brave, and they're gonna fulfill their part of the plan. So they'll start with the altar. They'll honor and observe their festivals, their holidays, etc. They're trying to basically recreate everything the way it was back when they were in the Promised Land. So that's the first part, and then the foundation is laid. So,
Going back to that, Jason,
yes, sir.
you know, you see that all through Abraham's building all those altars to God every time he went to a new land, to a new place.
Good point.
That's got to be, and that's that theme, like you said, goes through the entire Old Testament all the way, even into the New Testament in different ways. Not necessarily building altars, but other ways as well, praying and thanking God.
All right. It's a call to worship.
Call to worship.
Yeah, call to worship.
That's a lesson I think that has a lot of meaning. Every time, you know, we have a lot of changing in our lives, a lot of from one month or 1 year to the next. And you know, I think going back to Thanksgiving, you know, some of the lessons we learned a few weeks ago, Thanksgiving, you know, I think there's a connection there.
Oh yeah, and you know that when they were in captivity, they learned a whole new definition of appreciating what you have, right? Or appreciating what you did have, and it's definitely going to change lives. But for time's sake, they're going to rebuild the foundation, and I want to look at this last portion, starting in verse 11. So they put the foundation down for the temple, right? And you can read it up there if you want, or look at your own version. But it says, with praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. And all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. Okay, foundation to the temple. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of the temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise and the sound was heard far away. What do we have here?
The old temple to the new one.
So it looks like the older generation was disappointed. It doesn't say and many of the older priests. It says but many of the older priests and Levites, right? They're clearly disappointed. Okay, and the main reason is it wasn't as grandiose as the old temple. It's a smaller version. It's not what they were expecting. You know, they had this vision, I guess. They had this expectations, and it really upsets them. So you got people who are happy that they've laid the foundation. They're well on their way to rebuilding the temple. And then you got this problem, right? You got this.
Day when we
Right.
built the building.
Yeah, it's no different, right? It's no
We don't
different.
want windows put in to raise so the breeze can come through. We gotta.
Right.
you know,
And what's
don't
with
talk
these
about
pews,
money.
right? We need those chairs back. Anyway, question. How do we handle our disappointment when things don't turn out the way we expected? We leave? Can they get in the way of things? Our reactions? Can it get in the way of progress? Now, I'll give you all an example. Me and my wife are both Aggies, and the Aggies had this great football season. They were 11-0, and then they lost to Texas. And that just really, really disappointed me. And I was like, I'm done. I'm not even going to watch the playoffs. I don't care. They can do whatever, right? And it's not the best attitude. I know. I didn't handle my disappointment very well. Because it was a good football season, right? It's, being 11-1, there's nothing wrong with that. But, I want them to beat Texas too, right?
Morning quarterbacking.
Oh, sure. And, the tendency, right, is in any disappointment, we want to look for someone to blame. We want to make excuses, whatever the deal was, right? And it gets in the way. I should be extremely happy and enjoy the fact that the Aggies are in the playoffs and, they get a chance to play for the national championship. But I didn't like losing to Texas, right? May not be the best example in the world, but I think you got a problem here with the way they handled their disappointment. And I think, I have a second question for you here. If things don't turn out the way we thought they would or even should, does that mean it wasn't part of God's plan? Because I think, go ahead, Sue.
They long for the glory days, and they could have had it. They just kept falling away, and they could have had it. Just repeated and repeated.
I think it's perspective. Like the people who never got to live there before, they're just happy that they're back and they're getting attention. So they're just grateful for what they have.
Good point.
People who were there before, they can't let go of the past and just appreciate the fact that they're calling and start over again. So they're missing the whole.
If you didn't hear, Sarah said the people, that weren't ever there in the first place, they're just happy that they have a temple. To them, it's great. But the people had seen the old one, they're disappointed because they don't get exactly what they envisioned, what they saw. And again, I think that gets in the way of understanding that the plan of God is working. It's the way God intended it, etc.
Waited 70 years. He wanted time to pass for them to forget, just like the wanderings.
Just because it doesn't look like how it should to start doesn't mean it's not going to get there.
Right. But again, that's our thinking. Our thinking is it's got to work like this. This is the way it's supposed to be, right? If it's a plan by God, everything's going to go smooth, right? Well, not always the case. All right, when we get into Ezra 4 and 6, we see Zerubbabel faces challenges constructing the new temple. And I'm about to run out of time here. But accusations about the people of Judah rebelling were made by opposition groups to King Artaxerxes, leading to a stop in the work. And you see that story in verses 6 through 23. Verse 24, so at the end of the chapter, it says, "Thus the work on the house of God in Jerusalem came to a standstill until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia." So, and again, this is the very end of the chapter 4. So there's definitely some challenges. It's not going to be problem free. And as let me see what else I've got up here. He has to do some problem solving, right? So a letter is written to the local governor to confirm Judah's story. So they make them stop this building because people have told them, people who oppose the Jews have told them that they're going to be rebellious, they're going to stop paying taxes, you're going to have a major problem on your hands. So, and Cyrus is gone, so you got new kings there, and a letter is written to the local governor to conform their story, and that's in chapter 5. So they have to basically their project is put on hold until they can get approval to continue. I mean, this is life right here, right? This is the way things go. So verse 17 of chapter 5 says, "Now if it pleases the king, let a search be made in the royal archives of Babylon to see if King Cyrus did in fact issue a decree to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. Then let the king send us his decision on this matter." Now that's the Israelites, that's the Jews, Zerubbabel and those guys, writing a letter to the local governor of Trans-Euphrates is what they refer to that area as, saying, "Hey, you've been told wrong. We were given the blessing to do this. Would you please just go back and look and find where Cyrus did in fact give us the okay on this project. We're doing exactly what we were asked to do, told to do, given permission to do." And there's the bell. All right, Darius confirms the decrees issued by Cyrus and allows, so this is a new king, Darius the king, and allows the building of the temple to continue. It is completed, dedicated, and the Passover feast is held in chapter 6. So I had a couple more questions that we can't get to, but this is where we'll leave off, and I guess we'll pick up in January. I have to review y'all because I know we're all going to forget about it, but there you go. All right, appreciate everybody's comments and patience and all that.